His face was just inches from mine. We stood frozen in the narrow hallway, the light from the bathroom casting a faint halo around us, illuminating the tension that hung heavier than the steam curling out from behind me. The vase in my hands trembled. He hadn't meant to follow me in here, he'd said. Or maybe he had. I couldn't tell anymore. His words had stopped making sense somewhere between the flowers and the way he looked at me like he already knew the answer. Neither of us moved. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped. But all I could hear was my own breath. Then his eyes dropped, not to the floor, but to my lips. A knock on the front door shattered the moment like a stone through glass. I flinched. He stepped back. The hallway felt colder now. I told myself it was just a strange afternoon. But deep down, I already knew. That knock was only the beginning. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: do you agree that everyone deserves a second chance after cheating? It started the same way most things in suburbia do, with a moving truck and a batch of fresh lemon bars. He arrived on a Monday. Bright morning, no clouds. One of those Midwestern days where the air smells like someone's mowing grass 3 blocks away. I watched from the window above the kitchen sink as he climbed out of the cab, wearing a faded Ohio State hoodie and sunglasses, even though it wasn't that sunny. He looked too young for this neighborhood. Maybe 30-something. But the way he moved, measured, deliberate, said he'd seen his share of life already. I didn't mean to watch as long as I did. But 8 years of routine will make any disruption feel like fireworks. By the time my husband came into the kitchen, I was already pouring his coffee. He didn't notice the smudge on the window from where my forehead had been pressed. Big week, he mumbled, checking his phone. Conference starts Friday. I'll be in Atlanta until next Wednesday. I nodded. You packed already? Almost. Just shirts left. It had become our rhythm, these short trips, the brief hellos and long silences. We'd built a life on habits, grocery lists, and half-finished conversations. Love hadn't disappeared. It had simply grown quiet. Later that afternoon, I drove into town to pick up groceries. On a whim, I added a box of brownie mix and a bottle of wine I didn't need. At checkout, the cashier commented on the heat wave. I smiled politely, thinking about whether I'd bake something for the new neighbor. When I got home, he was still unloading. No help in sight. Just him and a dolly. I almost didn't go over. Almost. I put the brownies in the oven and crossed the street with the lemon bars I'd made the night before. My hands trembled slightly. Maybe from the heat. Maybe not. He looked surprised when I appeared at his open garage. I'm not here to sell you anything, I said, holding up the Tupperware like a peace offering. He grinned. Then you're already my favorite neighbor. We talked briefly, just enough for me to learn he'd moved from Grand Rapids, worked freelance in interior design, and didn't have kids. His smile was warm but restrained, like he didn't want to give away too much too fast. Back home, I replayed the conversation too many times. My husband barely glanced up from his laptop when I told him someone new moved in. He only asked, "Did you catch his name?" I hadn't. The week dragged. My husband buried himself in prep for his flight, pacing between rooms on work calls that all sounded the same. I cleaned more than usual, reorganized a spice rack, then did it again. There's a specific loneliness that comes from being invisible in your own kitchen. On Thursday, the first storm rolled in, thunder and sheets of rain that bent the trees. The lights flickered twice before cutting completely. I lit candles in the living room and tried to read, but the house felt too still. A knock startled me. I opened the door and found him standing there in a rain jacket, holding a small generator and a flashlight. Figured you might need this, he said. Didn't want you to be stuck in the dark. I tried to decline, but he insisted. 5 minutes later, we stood in my mudroom while he showed me how to use it. I made tea. He stayed for 20 minutes. Maybe 30. We didn't talk about anything deep. But the silences between us weren't awkward. They were tentative. Like both of us were still deciding how much of ourselves to allow. By the next morning, the lights were back. On the porch sat a paper bag from Duncan, warm still. Inside, a note, for the storm survivalist. That's when I noticed the shift. Small things, at first. He waved when I watered the flowers. Left a fresh jar of honey with a note, try this on toast. I found excuses to check the mailbox more often. Then came Sunday. My husband zipped up his suitcase without asking for help. Said he'd call from the airport. By noon, the house felt like a museum. I folded laundry I didn't need to fold, then took a walk around the block. When I returned, I saw him outside, trimming hedges shirtless in the sun. I looked too long. Again. That evening, I saw him at the local bakery. I almost pretended not to notice him, but he called out. Still recovering from the blackout? I'll survive, I said, smiling too wide. He handed me a pie. This one's better than the last. Try it. We walked out together. He carried my bag without asking. Back at home, I stared at that pie on the counter like it held answers. Monday came, and with it, more routine. Grocery shopping. Empty fridge. Dry cleaning. Except now everything felt like a delay tactic, a way to avoid thinking too long about anything. I should have known it wouldn't stay simple. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. My husband's message was short. Flight moved up. I'm coming home 2 days early. I read it twice, then once more, just to be sure. He would be home tomorrow. And I was suddenly aware of how quiet everything else had gotten. I reread the message, standing in the kitchen with the refrigerator door wide open, letting cold air spill out across my legs. Flight moved up. I'm coming home 2 days early. I closed the door slowly, like that would slow time with it. By tomorrow night, everything had to look the same. Smell the same. Feel the same. Nothing out of place, nothing too clean, nothing too different. I stared at the lemon dish towel I had replaced just yesterday. Too new. I swapped it out for the older one with a faint wine stain near the corner. The rest of the afternoon went in circles. I washed the towels in the guest bathroom, even though no one had used them. Rearranged the pillows. Took the trash out even though it wasn't full. Every movement was fast, robotic, like I could scrub away the shift in the air, erase the way the silence had started to feel like a conversation. By evening, the house was spotless. But my chest was a mess. I sat on the edge of the couch, checking the driveway across the street. His car wasn't there. A strange wave of something, disappointment, settled in my stomach. I told myself that was good. That it made things easier. Just as the sun started to dip behind the rooftops, the doorbell rang. I hesitated, heart stuttering. When I opened the door, he was standing there, hair slightly damp, holding a bouquet wrapped in brown paper. Sunflowers. Not roses. Thank God, not roses. I saw these and thought of you, he said. They looked stubborn and warm. I didn't respond. Not right away. I stepped aside. He followed me in, glancing around like he already knew the layout. I walked to the kitchen, filled a vase with water, and arranged the flowers with hands that wouldn't quite steady. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway of the hall, looking at me like the room wasn't even there. "This okay?" he asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He took a step closer. "If it's not, I'll go." My throat felt tight. "I'm not sure what it is." Neither of us moved for a moment. Then I picked up the vase and turned toward the guest bathroom where I usually kept fresh flowers. He followed, close behind. The steam from the shower earlier still lingered. As I reached for the counter, he stepped in too far. We both stopped, suddenly far too close. We kissed. I stepped back before either of us could say anything. My pulse was pounding in my ears. He looked like he wanted to say more. I didn't let him. "It's getting late," I said, quieter than I intended. He hesitated, then nodded once. By the time I walked him to the door, the air between us had grown dense and silent. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned slightly, but didn't say goodbye. I closed the door and leaned against it. The hallway still smelled like eucalyptus and his cologne. I spent the next hour rearranging things again, but this time it wasn't to hide anything. I needed something to do with my hands. I needed time to move. I couldn't sit. I couldn't be still. The flowers stayed in the bathroom. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. The next morning came fast. I woke up before the alarm, tossed in bed until the light crept through the blinds. I showered longer than usual, using my old shampoo instead of the newer one I'd bought last week. It was all about returning to what had been before. My husband texted at 9:12, "Boarding now. Love you." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Safe flight. Can't wait to see you." By midday, the house smelled like fresh-baked scones and cinnamon. I made a batch from a boxed mix and left them cooling by the window, a detail he'd expect. I vacuumed twice, even though the carpet didn't need it. At 4:45 p.m., I checked my reflection again. No lipstick. Nothing too bright. Just enough to not look tired. By 6 p.m., his car pulled into the driveway. I opened the door before he could ring. He stepped inside with a tired smile, dropped his bag near the stairs, and pulled me in for a half-hug, more familiar than warm. I caught a faint scent of airport coffee on his jacket. "This house smells amazing," he said. "You baked today?" "Just something simple." He walked toward the kitchen, sniffing the air. "It's different." "Good different." "You painted?" I shook my head, too quickly. He didn't press. He never did. After dinner, he unpacked his things in the bedroom. I stood in the hallway, watching him smooth out a shirt and hang it, just like he always did. That's when I noticed the door to the guest bathroom slightly ajar. I walked past it quickly, heart skipping. Later, he called out from the living room, asking if we still had that travel charger he left last time. I told him to check the drawer near the pantry. While he looked, I crept back into the bathroom. The vase. It was still there. Sitting on the counter. I reached for it, planning to dump the flowers in the trash, but something stopped me. My hand froze mid-air. I could still feel the weight of that kiss, still taste the aftermath of something I didn't plan and couldn't explain. I grabbed the vase, walked it down the hallway, and slipped out through the back door. Tossed the whole thing, water, stems, everything, into the outside bin like it was radioactive. I stood there a second longer than I should have. When I turned, my husband was in the kitchen window, watching. He didn't ask. He just went back to whatever he was doing. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep in front of the TV, I stood at the window, lights off, staring at the quiet street. The house across from mine was dark. But on the front step, in the faint orange glow of the porch light, was a brown paper bag. Neatly folded. A note tucked into the flap. I opened the door, looked around, nothing but night and crickets. I picked up the bag and opened it. Inside, still warm, were 2 slices of homemade pie. Peach. My favorite. And under the napkin, written in simple, careful handwriting. I still think the storm brought you to me. I froze. Then heard the unmistakable sound of a suitcase being unzipped in the other room. I closed the door and locked it. My hands trembled. I stood in the kitchen, the brown bag still in my hands, the note tucked neatly between my fingers like a match about to be struck. The TV in the living room continued playing, some rerun sitcom laugh track echoing into a house where no one was laughing. I folded the bag quickly, slipped the note into the junk drawer, and placed the pie slices on a plate like they came from anywhere else. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, as if the walls themselves had grown eyes. By morning, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Just a kind gesture. A small, simple reminder of something that never should have started. After breakfast, my husband left for the gym and errands. I loaded the dishwasher, wiped the counters, and walked straight into the garage, keys in hand. I didn't know where I was going until I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the community center, pretending I had a reason to be there. I walked laps around the indoor track until I couldn't feel my feet. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of his handwriting. Later that afternoon, the sky turned soft and gold, one of those picture-perfect suburban sunsets that made everything look more peaceful than it was. I found a note taped to my mailbox, "Gardens open. Sunset's gorgeous. Come by if you feel like it." I stared at it for 5 full minutes. Then I changed into jeans and a loose cardigan and walked across the street. He was sitting near the back fence, where the fire pit glowed and the breeze carried faint music from a Bluetooth speaker. Something warm and folksy, old James Taylor or John Denver. The kind of music you pretend not to love in your 20s but secretly do by your 40s. He stood up as I walked in. No words. He gestured to a second chair. I sat. For a while, we just watched the sun bleed down into the trees. He poured wine, offered me a glass. I took it. Neither of us said anything that really meant anything, at first. Just soft surface words to keep the silence from swallowing us whole. But eventually it cracked. He told me his ex-wife had left him after a year of trying to fix what wasn't broken, that she wanted something he couldn't name, and left without waiting for him to find it. He said he stayed in Michigan for 2 more years out of inertia before finally deciding to move somewhere new, somewhere quiet. I asked why he picked here. He said, "I didn't. I just stopped somewhere the road did." The firelight flickered. The music changed. He asked, "Are you happy?" I looked at the wine glass in my hand. Then at my shoes. Then at him. I don't think I've asked myself that in a long time. He leaned forward. Not aggressively. Just enough to close some invisible gap. "I've tried to stay out of your way. But something about this feels hard to ignore." "It is," I said, quietly. "I'm not trying to make anything harder. You know that." "I know." Then we kissed. It was neither planned nor dramatic. Just something that happened in the stillness. Like 2 people caught in a moment they didn't want to interrupt. Afterward, I stood up too quickly, said I needed to get home before the streetlights came on. He didn't stop me. Back at the house, my husband was on the phone with someone from work, his voice bouncing between frustration and artificial patience. I nodded when he made eye contact and disappeared into the kitchen. The rest of the evening blurred. At some point, I found the jar of honey he'd left me a week ago, still untouched in the pantry. I almost threw it out. Almost. But instead, I placed it gently behind the cereal boxes, like it belonged in some hidden corner of my life. The next morning, I planned to stay busy. Laundry, groceries, more pretending. I told my husband I might visit a friend in the next town over, just for a drive, some air. He didn't ask which friend. I got in the car and just started driving. A few minutes out, my phone buzzed, a message from him, "Want to get away? I know a place. One night. No pressure." I didn't respond right away. I pulled into a Walgreens parking lot, stared at the cracked dashboard for 10 full minutes, then typed, "Where?" He sent a pin. A lodge an hour out, near the lake. Quiet. Tucked behind woods and water and plausible deniability. By mid-afternoon, I was home again, trying to find excuses not to go. But there were none. Not ones that stuck. I told my husband I needed to stay over with that friend, that I'd be back early tomorrow. He barely looked up from his laptop when he said, "Okay." When I met him at the gas station just off the highway, I didn't speak for the first 10 miles. I watched the trees blur past, my hands folded in my lap like I was trying to keep myself inside my own skin. He glanced at me once, then turned the music on low. I couldn't tell you what song played. Just that it felt right. At the lodge, the air smelled like pine and old stone. The woman at the front desk handed us the key without asking questions. Room 209. We spent the evening drinking local wine in the small restaurant, sitting at a table near the window that overlooked the water. The sky was lavender. The conversation stayed safe, light, clean. Laughter came easier than I expected. After dinner, we walked along the edge of the lake, shoes in our hands, water lapping gently at our ankles. The stars began to appear, one by one. He asked if I ever imagined doing something like this. I said, not until it happened. We spent night together. I woke just after 5. He was still asleep, breathing slow and deep. I got up, walked to the small balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the lake as morning peeled back the dark. My phone buzzed. A text from my husband, "Flight rescheduled. I'll be home by 7 p.m. My chest tightened. I dressed in silence. We left the lodge just after 6. The drive home felt sharper this time, every minute a count ticking down to something I couldn't undo. When we pulled into town, he slowed the car outside my house. I opened the door before the engine stopped. He didn't say goodbye. Back inside, I cleaned everything again. Showered. Dressed. Rearranged the cushions for the 3rd time. By the time my husband walked through the door, it looked like I hadn't moved at all. He hugged me briefly, then walked toward the kitchen. "Smells different in here," he said. "You cooking something?" I shook my head. "No, just aired the place out." He nodded, opened the fridge, and grabbed a soda. Later that evening, while he was showering, I went to the guest bathroom. And that's when I saw it. A brush. Not mine. Not his. Left on the edge of the counter. His. I stared at it like it had no weight and all the weight in the world. And from the other room, my husband called out, "Hey, did you move my charger?" "It's not where I left it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stood in the bathroom, brush in hand, heart racing with a steady, hollow rhythm. It was his, the black travel-sized one with the worn grip. I remembered it sitting on the lodge nightstand, beside the pair of glasses he never wore outside. I hadn't noticed it missing. Now it was here, on the counter my husband used every morning to shave. I put it in the cabinet under the sink, behind the old towels and expired sunscreen. Then I opened the window, let the air rush in until the eucalyptus scent thinned to nothing. Downstairs, the TV was back on, and my husband was already halfway into another bag of trail mix. I made tea, sat beside him, nodded at all the right times during his story about a delayed connection in Charlotte. My ears caught every third word. My mind was already somewhere else, sorting through memory, through timing, through risk. That night I barely slept. Every sound felt too sharp. Every silence too wide. I could hear the brush knocking against the pipe under the sink. I could feel it whispering. By morning, I needed to move. I told him I'd be running errands, Trader Joe's, Home Depot, just little things. He barely looked up. I left without finishing my toast. Driving felt like escaping. The streets looked ordinary, but I didn't belong to them anymore. I turned down a side road I'd never taken before. It led out past the town limits, toward the hills where the trees thickened and the gas stations started offering homemade beef jerky and fudge by the register. Somewhere in the quiet, my phone buzzed. It was a single message. No name. Just, still thinking about the lake. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. Instead, I drove home. Parked. Sat in the car until the sun moved an inch lower in the sky. Then I stepped out and walked into the house like I had nothing to hide. That evening, I made lasagna from scratch, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't guilt. It was distraction, a form of noise I could control. He complimented it. I smiled like I meant it. We talked about maybe repainting the guest room. Later, when he went upstairs to take a call, I stepped outside for a moment of air. The street was quiet. But his porch light was on. He was sitting there, elbows on his knees, head tilted back toward the sky. He didn't see me at first. I should have gone back inside. But I crossed the street. He looked at me without moving. I didn't sit. I stayed standing, arms crossed. You left something, I said. He nodded slowly. I figured. You can't do that. I didn't mean to. I packed fast. You didn't forget the wine. Or the charger. Or your wallet. He looked up. So maybe I didn't forget. I turned to leave. He said, we both know it wasn't just a night. I didn't answer. I crossed back to my house and shut the door behind me like I could lock something out. The next morning, my husband was already dressed when I came down. He was cheerful in that detached, half-present way he always was after a business trip. He suggested brunch in town. We hadn't done that in months. I said yes before I could stop myself. We ended up at a small bistro that opened recently, all white tile and plants in hanging macrame. He ordered an omelet and made a joke about the decor looking like a Pinterest board exploded. I laughed, even though I didn't want to. While we ate, he talked about his schedule, about new clients, about a conference in October. He asked if I wanted to go somewhere for Labor Day. I nodded, though I had no answer ready. Then, without warning, he reached across the table and took my hand. We should go away. Just us. I looked at him, surprised. I know it's been a while, he said. Something in his eyes wasn't just suggestion. It was searching. Not desperate. But aware. I squeezed his hand and looked away, pretending to study the specials board. My skin felt too tight on my body. Back home, he went to the garage to fix a squeaky hinge on the door to the basement. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the travel mug he always left by the sink. Then I walked upstairs. The guest bathroom door was ajar. Inside, everything looked the same. But I opened the cabinet anyway. The brush was gone. I checked twice. Moved everything. It wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I walked down, trying to act normal, asking about the hinge. He said it was fixed. I nodded. tried to smile. That evening, just before sunset, there was a knock at the door. I froze. My husband called out from upstairs, "You get that?" I opened it. He stood there. His eyes flicked briefly toward the window, then back to me. In his hand was the brush. "I came for this," he said. "You were in the house?" "No," he said. "I asked the kid from next door. He saw me drop it when I brought the generator back." I took it slowly. Closed the door. Went upstairs. Placed it back under the sink. Then walked into the bedroom, where my husband was folding laundry. He asked, "Everything okay?" I said yes. We watched TV that night, but I couldn't follow the plot. I kept seeing the front porch. The way he stood there. The way it felt like something was fraying quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface. 2 days passed. Then came the invitation. He left it in the mailbox, no envelope. A simple piece of paper. Winery tasting upstate. Quiet. Just a few hours. Come if you want. No pressure. No signature. No time. Just coordinates. I stared at it for an hour. Then put it in my bag and went back inside. I told my husband I was meeting a friend for lunch the next day. He didn't ask which one. That morning, I dressed slowly. Checked the mirror too many times. When I arrived, he was already waiting. The vineyard was small, rustic. Off a dirt road that didn't show up on most GPS apps. The staff greeted us casually, like we were regulars. We weren't the only ones there, but we might as well have been. The wine was sharp, the food local. The hours passed without being noticed. We walked the edge of the property, past a line of trees where hammocks hung like lazy punctuation marks between trunks. He pointed at a small guest house beyond the vines. "Want to see inside?" I hesitated. Then followed him. We spent night together. In the morning, I left early, before the others woke. The sky was still pink with sleep. When I arrived home, my husband was in the driveway, coffee in hand. He smiled. "You're early." "Didn't want to miss the day," I said. Later, when I went upstairs to change, I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside was a postcard. One I'd never seen before. It showed a lake. The same lake from the lodge. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting. "If it has to end, let it be beautiful." And under it, a name I hadn't heard in years. But I knew exactly who it belonged to. The postcard lay face up in the drawer, quiet and damning. A glossy photo of the lake at dawn, the one we had walked beside, the one where we'd said nothing and everything. On the back, in tidy script, "If it has to end, let it be beautiful." Signed with a name I hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. I stared at it longer than I should have, searching for clues I wouldn't find. The handwriting wasn't his. And that name, not his either. Not the neighbor. Not anyone I'd told him about. But someone from the past. Someone I hadn't heard from since before marriage ever became real. I shut the drawer slowly, as if the postcard might whisper something else if I was gentle enough. Downstairs, my husband was playing music in the kitchen, soft rock, something from the early 2000s, loud enough to mask the clinking of dishes. He was making pancakes. I walked past the postcard in my head as I entered the room. "You're quiet," he said. "Didn't sleep well." "Coffee's ready." He handed me a mug, already sweetened the way I liked it. We sat at the table in the kind of silence that feels ordinary. The kind you don't question after years together. He talked about yard work, a possible trip to Tennessee in the fall, how the price of mulch had apparently doubled overnight. I nodded at all the right times, but my brain was miles away, locked in a drawer upstairs, turning over the weight of those few words on that card. By noon, he had a hardware store run planned and a sudden interest in replacing the front door hinge. I told him I needed to drop something off at the church, a lie that came far too easily now. Instead, I walked. The air was warm, clouds rolling in from the west, that kind of slow-brewing summer storm that takes all day to decide whether it's serious or just passing through. The sidewalks were mostly empty. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the soft hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark from a backyard. I passed his house. The windows were open. A breeze stirred the curtains. He wasn't outside. Not on the porch. Not in the garden. But the front door was cracked open. Without thinking, I turned. He was in the hallway, a box of books in his arms. He didn't flinch when he saw me. Just tilted his head slightly, as if I'd been expected. I followed him into the living room. He placed the box down, dusted his hands, and gestured toward the window. I thought you might come. I didn't ask why. Instead, I walked to the shelf where he'd arranged a small row of records, vinyl stacked like memory fragments. James Taylor. Fleetwood Mac. Carole King. He watched me without speaking. You didn't send the postcard, I finally said. He shook his head. No. But I saw it. I turned. You were in the house? Not since that night, he said. I swear. But I saw you take it out of the mailbox. You knew who it was from? I have a guess. That made two of us. He moved toward the kitchen and pulled something from the drawer, another note. Folded. He handed it to me without explanation. It was from her. Not me. Not him. Her. My closest friend from the old days. The one who introduced me to my husband. The one who moved across the country years ago and sent birthday cards with sunflower stickers every July. It was her handwriting. And it said this. I saw the two of you. I'm not judging. I just think you should know you still have choices. We all do. Even now. I didn't know what to feel. Or what to say. Instead, I folded the note and placed it back on the counter. You okay? He asked. I don't know. Want to get out of here? His voice was even. Not forceful. Just offering. I can't just keep disappearing, I said. No one disappears. We just move around in plain sight. We ended up in the car 20 minutes later, headed toward the town line. No bags. No plans. Just movement. I didn't ask where we were going, and he didn't explain. The trees blurred past like they always did, green and soft and full of the same questions I'd been asking myself since that first storm knocked out the lights. He pulled off near the edge of town, down a narrow gravel road lined with cottonwoods. A small sign read, Old Chapel Hill Cemetery, EST 1893. I stared at it. Strange place to take someone, I said. It's peaceful, he answered. No one interrupts. We walked slowly, passing rows of worn stones and overgrown plots. Wildflowers bloomed between the graves. A hawk cried in the distance. We didn't speak for several minutes. He stopped near a bench beneath an oak tree. We sat. I'm not asking you to leave your life, he said. I just want you to stop pretending you're not already halfway out of it. I didn't respond. I just watched a small bird flit between branches, then disappear into the brush. Then I turned to him. We can't keep doing this. I know. But I keep showing up. So do I. We sat in silence. Then, slowly, I reached for his hand. Held it for just a second. Then let go. The clouds finally broke. Just light rain at first. Enough to make the air shift. We walked back to the car without running. By the time we reached my house, the rain had stopped. He parked a block away. I got out, walked the rest alone. When I opened the door, my husband was on the phone. I caught only a few words: design meeting, shifted schedule, in-person presentation. He smiled when he saw me. Covered the receiver. Hey. Quick question. Do you remember that guy from the bakery? The one who gave you the apple pie? I froze. Yeah, I said carefully. He reached out. Said he might be looking for freelance help. Small renovation project. Wants to meet Thursday. I didn't answer. Just stood there. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, said he met you first. Called you the woman with the storm candles. I walked past him. Up the stairs. Into the guest bathroom. And stopped cold. Because sitting on the counter, right where I'd once placed the vase of sunflowers, was a new one. Filled with fresh tulips. And a note tucked neatly into the ribbon. I know you still keep your windows open when it rains. I didn't touch the tulips. I didn't read the note again. I didn't need to. I already knew every word. Knew the curve of each letter and how the sentence ended with a period instead of a question mark. I left them where they were, sitting on the counter like a quiet dare. Downstairs, the kitchen timer dinged. My husband pulled a casserole out of the oven, humming to himself. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. Everything on the surface was warm, clean, whole. He called up the stairs, dinner's ready. I washed my hands, came down, and sat across from him at the table. He was already halfway into a story about someone from the office who'd quit unexpectedly. I ate slowly, methodically. Every bite mechanical. My mind wasn't here. It was in the hallway. In the guest bathroom. In the vase. You okay? He asked mid-chew. Tired. Maybe we should get out of town next weekend, he said. I'll look at places. You've always liked Asheville. I nodded. That sounds nice. He smiled. Yeah. I think we need a break from here. After dinner, he insisted on cleaning up. I took the opportunity to disappear upstairs. I didn't go to the guest bathroom this time. I went to the bedroom, laid on top of the made bed, and stared at the ceiling until the sound of running water faded and the house grew quiet again. The next morning, the vase was gone. Replaced with the old candle set I'd kept there for years. Arranged perfectly. Like nothing had ever been different. I checked the cabinet under the sink. Nothing. I even looked behind the towels, beneath the cleaners. No flowers. No note. And somehow, that was worse. Later that day, at the grocery store, I caught myself reading labels without seeing them. I dropped an avocado and didn't bother to pick it up. One of the employees said something cheerful in passing. I nodded like I heard him. Back home, I put everything away without thinking. My husband had gone to visit his mother 2 towns over. He said he'd be back by dinner. I paced the kitchen, made coffee, then dumped it out. I stood by the window and looked across the street. His house was dark. I crossed anyway. There was no car in the driveway, but the side gate was unlatched. I pushed it open slowly, walked through the overgrown path between the hedges. The backyard was exactly as I remembered. 2 chairs by the fire pit. A small table still marked with water rings from forgotten drinks. A shovel leaned against the shed. I didn't sit. I walked around the perimeter of the fence. Watched the wind shift the leaves. Counted every second I wasn't being seen. The back door opened. He was barefoot, in a dark t-shirt, holding a ceramic mug. I figured if I stayed quiet long enough, you'd show up. You moved the flowers. They didn't feel safe anymore. Neither do I. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't need to. I wasn't here for it. You know what we're doing doesn't have a name, I said. He nodded once. That's what makes it real. I looked away. Toward the old vinyl player still half covered with a towel. You should leave, I said. From this house, or from you? Both. He sipped from the mug, stared at me like he was trying to memorize something. I tried, he said finally. But then I heard your window open in the rain again. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the gate, crossed the street, and went inside before I lost the nerve to mean it. That evening, I cooked like I was trying to bury something under sauce and salt. My husband returned just as I was setting the table. He brought wine. I poured 2 glasses, and we sat by the bay window for the first time in months. He started talking about fall plans, possible cabin rentals, hiking trails, even said something about booking a couple's massage. I nodded along, eyes locked on the trees outside, already starting to yellow at the tips. Then he said something I didn't expect. I saw him. I turned slowly. Who? Our neighbor. My throat tightened. When? Last weekend. He was at the co-op by the highway. Buying stone tiles. Said he's redoing the fireplace. I said nothing. He asked about you. I sipped my wine, hand steady. What did he say? Just that you two had chatted once or twice. Called you quiet. Nice. The usual. I forced a smile. He's leaving soon, my husband added. Didn't you know? I shook my head. Said he might head back to Michigan. Or somewhere coastal. Didn't sound decided. That night I didn't sleep. I laid awake watching shadows stretch across the ceiling like they were dragging time with them. The next morning I wrote a list. Groceries. Clean garage. Drop clothes at donation center. Forget what never should have happened. By afternoon, I'd done all but the last one. I checked the mailbox. Empty. No note. No gesture. Nothing. Then I heard a knock. Not at the front door. At the side. I opened it slowly, heart crawling up my throat. But it wasn't him. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down, the older woman with the yellow lab who always baked pies for the HOA meetings. I wasn't sure if you'd heard, she said. Heard what? She leaned in like it was a secret. He's gone. Moved out this morning. Said it was sudden. A truck came at sunrise. I blinked. I didn't see anything. Well, you wouldn't. He didn't go through the front. Just loaded and left. I tried to ask where, but he just smiled and said, "Tell her thank you for the rain." Strange, isn't it? I nodded slowly. After she left, I walked upstairs. Opened the guest bathroom. Empty. Perfect. Still. I walked back down, opened the back door, stepped out into the yard, and just stood there. The wind picked up, tugging at the trees. The sky, heavy and low, finally cracked. It started raining. And I didn't close the window. The rain didn't stop for hours. It clung to the roof like it was trying to sink through it, steady and unbothered by everything it touched. I stood at the open window until my sleeves were damp and my skin had cooled. The only thing I could hear was the rhythmic patter in my own breath, sharper now that the street was empty. His house was dark. Silent. Gone. Boxes. A truck. No warning. No note. Just absence. I didn't know what I expected. Something messy, maybe. A confrontation. One last long look across the driveway. Instead, it ended quietly, like it had never truly started. By the time my husband came home, the rain had stopped. He dropped his umbrella near the door and shook off his jacket. His hair was wet, the front of his shirt stuck to his chest. He looked at me for a long moment, not suspicious, not accusatory, just watching. "Were you outside?" "A little." He glanced at the open window. "It's getting colder." "I know." He didn't push further. We ate dinner in near silence. He watched a game on mute while I sat beside him pretending to read. At one point, he reached over, took my hand gently, and rested it on his knee. We stayed like that for longer than we should have. I didn't pull away. But I didn't close the gap either. That night, I dreamt I was walking through an airport. Dozens of gates. No luggage. Every screen read final call, but none of them said where they were going. I woke up before the sun. He was already in the shower. I heard the water turn off, the sound of him stepping out onto the tile. I went to the kitchen, started coffee, and stared at the toaster like it was going to tell me what to do next. The postcard was still in the drawer. The one from the lake. I read the back again even though I had memorized it. If it has to end, let it be beautiful. By 9, we were both dressed. He came down holding a shirt on a hanger. "Do you remember this one?" I nodded. "You wore it in San Diego?" "Our first trip together." "I remember." He smiled faintly. "Feels like a different version of us." Maybe it was. He set the shirt by the door and poured coffee into his travel mug. "I'm thinking of taking a day off next week. Just us. Drive somewhere. Hike maybe." "Okay." He looked at me again. "I want to feel like we're still choosing this." I nodded, unsure if that made him feel better or worse. He kissed the top of my head and left for the office. By noon, I'd scrubbed the guest bathroom twice. Not because it needed it. Because I needed to erase the last memory attached to it. Later, I walked past the neighbor's house. Empty now. The porch still had a wind chime hanging, a dull silver one that barely moved. The lock on the door had been changed, and the grass already looked like it hadn't been mowed in weeks. I pressed my palm to the side of my thigh to keep it from shaking. At the grocery store, I ran into a woman from the church committee, one of the chatty ones who never really asked questions but always circled them. She said, "You hear who bought that house yet?" I shook my head. She leaned in. "Nephew. The one from his brother's side. Came to help with the move. Apparently decided to stay." I blinked. "He has a nephew?" She laughed. "Adult. Early 30s, I'd guess. Real quiet. Real polite. Said he's just here until he figures things out." I nodded like the information meant nothing to me. Back home, I looked across the street again. Sure enough, a dark gray pickup was now parked in the driveway. Same make, different plates. I hadn't noticed it that morning. Or I had, and refused to register it. That evening, my husband brought home Thai food. He insisted on eating outside, despite the chill. He said, "It's good for us. Fresh air clears the emotional plaque." I laughed. He smiled. "Still good to hear you do that." We drank wine. Talked about meaningless things. The house felt more like a museum than a home. After dinner, we washed dishes side by side. He dried each one carefully, like he was building something fragile. He turned to me as I handed him the last plate. "I've been thinking about what you asked." I didn't ask anything. Last week. About whether I'd still choose this life. Choose us. I didn't use those words. But it's what you meant. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. Well? He hesitated. I would. But I'd want to know what I'm choosing it against. I didn't reply. That night, I lay awake long after he fell asleep. I watched the shadows on the ceiling again, now softer, more scattered. The wind picked up outside, brushing the leaves against the windows like fingertips. I thought about going downstairs. About making tea. About anything that would fill the silence. But instead, I stayed still. Eyes wide open in the dark. The next morning, I opened the front door to grab the paper. And there he stood. Not the neighbor. The nephew. Holding a small package. No expression. No words. He handed it to me, nodded once, then walked away. Inside the box was a photo. Of the lake. The same lake from the postcard. But taken from a different angle. One I hadn't seen. One that showed the two chairs we had sat in, ours empty and waiting. Behind them, standing slightly out of focus, was a woman. Blonde. Older. Holding a phone. And watching us. I stared at the photo, fingers trembling slightly along its edges. It was taken from across the lake. Framed just wide enough to catch the curve of the chairs we'd sat in and the edge of the dock we'd stood on afterward. The timing was perfect. Or terrible. There we were, not touching, not kissing, just existing too close, angled toward one another in a way that said too much without saying anything. And behind us, in the distance, a figure. A woman. Not a blur. Not a mistake. She was there. Focused. Framed. Holding something in her hand that looked like a phone. Her body turned toward us, frozen in the act of watching. I set the photo down slowly, carefully, as if it might burn if I touched it too long. Down the street, a lawnmower hummed to life. Someone's dog barked. The world outside kept moving. But in here, something shifted. I checked the packaging again. No note. No sender. No hint of who placed it in that box or why the nephew had been the one to deliver it. His face had shown nothing, not a hint of confusion, not recognition, just that distant politeness that left me more unnerved than comforted. I took the photo upstairs. Closed it inside the back of an old cookbook I hadn't touched in years. Buried it behind the crockpot recipes and sealed the cover shut. Then I opened every window in the house. My husband returned just before noon, sunglasses in his shirt pocket, coffee in hand. He kissed my cheek lightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I didn't sleep." "You want to get out for a bit? Maybe go walk around the farmer's market?" "Too many people." He nodded, sipped his coffee. "We don't have to do anything." And yet everything felt like it was already happening without us. By afternoon, I'd cleaned the living room, rearranged the bookshelves, and baked a peach cobbler I didn't want to eat. I was halfway through folding laundry when I spotted him through the window. Not the nephew. Him. Back. Walking across the sidewalk toward our house. My breath hitched. He hadn't knocked. He didn't hesitate. He walked around the side of the house, toward the backyard gate. Like he used to. Like he had every right to. I dropped the shirt I was folding, crossed the kitchen, and stepped outside before he could make it to the back door. He froze when he saw me. I stepped down toward the grass. What are you doing? His jaw tightened. I shouldn't be here. You already are. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know she'd take it. The woman in the photo? She's not who you think. Then who is she? He shook his head. I don't know anymore. I don't understand any of this, I said. I came back to tell you. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to. Someone saw us. I saw the photo. It wasn't meant for you. Then who was it meant for? He hesitated. Looked like he might speak. Then shook his head again and stepped back. I didn't send it, he said. I don't care. Yes, you do. We stood in the yard, just far enough apart to feel the tension stretching between us like string about to snap. I'm not here to start anything, he said. But I needed you to know I didn't walk away because I wanted to. It was taken out of my hands. You still had a choice. So did you. That landed heavier than I expected. He turned and walked toward the street without another word. I watched him go. That night, my husband made pasta. We ate on the back porch under string lights he'd rehung the weekend before. He poured wine. Laughed at something on the radio. Tried. And I sat there, sipping slowly, nodding when appropriate. Until he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. I forgot to give you this, he said. They gave it to me when I visited the new guy across the street. Said it's for the shed, in case he locks himself out while traveling. I froze. You talked to him? Briefly. Tall, quiet. Odd, but polite. Said he's a contractor, might be staying here a while. Mentioned he'd been in town before. I looked down at the key. I recognized the tag on it, it was the one he always used. He'd left it on his workbench, the same green tag with the faded initials. Now it was back. Not with him. With someone else. I excused myself from the table, walked into the house, and went straight upstairs. I opened the cookbook, pulled out the photo, and stared at the woman again. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. She wasn't just watching. She was looking at me. Not us. Not him. Me. There was something about the way her shoulders squared, the way her feet were planted. She'd come there for me. I pulled the photo closer, studied the face distant but sharp enough. The hair was familiar. The jawline. The posture. It hit me like a wave crashing from nowhere. She looked exactly like my husband's sister. I hadn't seen her in years. But she had been at our wedding. She had that same silver phone. She once lived not far from that lake. And she'd always been observant. I closed the photo, slid it back between the pages. When I returned downstairs, my husband was rinsing plates. Did she say anything else? I asked. Who? The new neighbor. Oh, no. Just something strange. What? He wiped his hands slowly. Said to tell you, don't forget room 209. I didn't move. He didn't smile. Then he added, softer this time, is there something I need to know? The room spun just slightly. Everything still. Quiet. Before I could answer, a knock came at the door. He turned. I followed. When he opened it, we both froze. A woman stood there. Blonde. Older. And behind her, at the curb, the nephew waited beside a running car. She looked at me. Then at my husband. I'm his wife, she said calmly. And I think we need to talk. And just like that, everything fell out from underneath me.